Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Los Angeles, and welcome to our session here, Democracy Dollars, the Future of Campaign Finance Reform. It's wonderful to see you all at 9:30 a.m. My name is Mike Drashkovich. I am a volunteer co-lead with Los Angeles for Democracy Vouchers. We are a new campaign organizing for an open and equitable campaign finance system here in Los Angeles. Thank you for choosing to be with us here. It's always energizing to see folks interested in new ideas for strengthening our democracy, specifically our campaign finance system. I want to give a special shout out to RepresentUs for giving us an hour to have this conversation. Thank you. I'm honored to be on stage with these folks here, inspiring leaders from across the country, working to push democracy dollars in their respective communities, all in different capacities. And I'm also told we have a live stream going, so for those joining, hello and welcome, glad to have you. To start, we're all aware of the destructive forces acting upon our democracy to divide us, to exclude us from participating. I think we can also see the important role that campaign finance reform has to play in laying the foundation for a new politics, one that can pulse forth all of our voices on the stage, draw upon their experiences and organizing insights to see how democracy dollars specifically can be a critical piece of that foundation and something we can all take up right now in our backyards, wherever you are. This is something that you can start working on. We, at the end of the session, we want to reserve 15-20 minutes to get your questions. So just ask you to keep your questions in mind. And before I panelists here, I just want to give a brief overview of democracy dollars for those who may be unfamiliar. Democracy dollars or democracy vouchers, we call them both, use both terms. But a democracy voucher is a campaign finance system, which all residents are issued vouchers that they can give to any local campaign of their choosing, who can then redeem those vouchers for public campaign funds. And what that does is, for donors, it means well, anyone can donate. You no longer need disposable income to participate in your campaign finance system. And so for candidates, that means you no longer need connections to wealthy fundraising networks to run competitive and successful campaigns. That means more voices can run, especially from communities that have been historically disenfranchised, like our community, working class communities and our communities of color. And so when you have those more candidates and you have those more donors, we just have greater levels of participation, especially among low propensity voters. So we're going to hear about that in a bit from the folks in Seattle. And yeah, this is not just theoretical, it's happening right now in Seattle. They've had several cycles of effects that we're starting to explore here, how to expand the finance program through democracy vouchers to include all Angelenos. If you're interested in diving into the research on democracy vouchers, we've just published a report on our website, lademocracyvouchers.org. I'll give you a really good introduction to what they are and some of the research on that. So let's dive in, let's get started. I want to introduce, starting with Cynthia E. John Vasquez, who's the Executive Director of Washington Bus, a statewide movement building organization that increases political power and civic participation among young people across Washington state. She's currently working on a ballot initiative to bring democracy vouchers to the state level and brings a remarkable and much needed perspective to campaign finance reform. I'm so glad to have you here. Thank you. Next up, we have Liz Suck, the Executive Director of Oakland Rising, a social justice collaborative that educates and mobilizes voters to self-organize for a more inclusive democracy. Liz was a key leader in the coalition behind Measure W, the Oakland Fair Elections Act, which voters overwhelmingly passed last November, making Oakland the second city in the nation to introduce a democracy voucher system. And just personally, Liz was so generous with her time and supported our campaign from the get-go. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Pastor Leslie Jones, the organizing director from the Amos Project, a faith-based project out of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, the state's largest community organizing and power building network. Pastor Leslie has been pastoring for 20 years. Wow. focused on organizing in the Black church and Black congregations. And it's so inspiring to see their faith-based approach in action in the campaign finance reform world. And I'm so excited to hear more about that today. So thank you for being here. Next, we have Aura Vasquez, environmental justice organizer, good friend and advisor to Los Angeles for Democracy Vouchers, who ran for city council here in 2020 and is running again. Aura served as the youngest commissioner and the first immigrant commissioner of the powerful Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. She brings an immense passion, and I'm grateful we get to work with her daily. So thank you so much. And last but not least, we have Aaron McKean, the legal counsel for state and local reform at Campaign Legal Center, a nonpartisan nonprofit that works to advance democracy at all levels of government. Aaron also served with the Wisconsin Legislative Reference Bureau, drafting legislation for members of the Wisconsin legislature, so knows a thing or two about bills and legislation. I'm also thankful for Aaron's generosity and patience for tolerating all of our questions at the early stages of our campaign. So thank you for being here. Okay, so let's dive in. Cynthia, I'd love to start with you. You're now working on this statewide effort, but just to start from the beginning, why did Democracy Vouchers initially resonate with you, and how has it worked in Seattle?
Definitely. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here. I am not a morning person, but one thing that gets me up is doing work to protect democracy. So appreciate all of you for being here. So as Mike mentioned, at its core, the democracy vouchers are a way to empower everyday people to participate in our democracy. And that's what voters understood back in 2015 when they overwhelmingly approved the program. And it has been widely successful on so many fronts. It has not only increased and diversified who is running for Seattle City Council positions, there's also been increases in civic engagement, and it's also empowering new candidates to run for office for the very first time. And it's really incredibly exciting to see so many efforts begin to pop up. Congrats to Oakland, soon we'll have LA and so many more. So thank you to my colleagues here on stage and those out in the audience for your work on this. So, your question, Mike, was like, what has the impacts been? What are the numbers telling us? In terms of small donor participation, we have since seen the introduction of the program more than double of small donors in Seattle City Council races. And we have especially seen increases amongst historically disenfranchised communities like Black, Indigenous people of color, young folks, immigrants as well. In terms of increased civic engagement, we have seen through a study that what are known as low propensity voters or first-time voters are more than 11 times more likely to vote and continue to vote after they use a democracy voucher, right? Like, we gotta give a clap for that, y'all. And we have also seen huge successes in empowering new first-time candidates to run. I'll share a quick story of City Council member Teresa Mosqueda, who was the first-time candidate to use the voucher program and win in the City of Seattle elections. Since then, she has been a strong champion on our City Council for workers' rights, student rights, youth rights, our neighbors experiencing homelessness, and we wouldn't have Teresa Mosqueda without the democracy voucher program, right? So this is a testament to it working. She's now this election cycle running for King County Council, and this shows that there is a potential strong development of the candidate pipeline with a program like this. And that's pretty important too if we want to continue to build strong progressive candidates at every level of our government. And then Mike, your second question was, why did I get involved or the Washington Bus get involved in the work that we do? There's two reasons for that. The first one is that it's just good common sense policy. And that's just the bottom line. This type of program gives everybody the opportunity, again, to participate in our democracy and to be a donor, regardless of their wealth, their zip code, or even immigration status, because in Seattle, residents are also able to use the voucher program. Yes, hot to that. And this program also means that candidates have to interact with their communities if they want to win, you know? And all of that just strengthens our democracy because candidates aren't beholden to big donors or wealthy donors. They're encouraged to talk to their constituents, listen to the issues that they care about most, and they're not beholden to those big special interests of the wealthy few. And I'll end with this, that the second reason why I got involved in advocating for democracy voucher program is personal to me. I'm an undocumented immigrant, and growing up, I saw voting as the only form of civic engagement, and someone that can't vote, I didn't think that I could participate. By allowing legal permanent residents to be a part of this program, it is expanding the electorate base. It is giving every person the opportunity to have a say in what issues are voted on because of the candidates that they're choosing. So for me, this issue, this program, this policy is very personal.
Touching on the program's ability to expand access and bring everyone into the process is really, really critical. Tell me, what are some of the lessons you've learned from Seattle that you're hoping to bring to this campaign at the state level?
Definitely. So while Washington State is a leader in campaign transparency, voting access, voting rights, there's still so much work to do for us. And I think one of the biggest lessons learned is just being able to expand on the narrative of why this is important for both legislators who are going to be voting on the issue, but also community members as well. That is one of the most important things that we can do, is really empowering our constituencies, our basis of organizations that we work with to understand the program. And so for us, we still believe that too few people of color, rural people have the resources to run for office across Washington State. We still believe that too few people are able to donate in our elections, and that's why we're running a legislation that we introduced this past cycle, but we'll reintroduce again in 2024 to expand the democracy voucher program statewide so that more people, more communities are able to see the same success and access to democracy that we have seen in Seattle.
Amazing. Now for folks here and also joining us online, what's one piece of advice you would give to folks who may want to get started with this work, and how can they support your work going forward?
Well, supporting our work through funding is always a thing. Please fund us, resource us, give us C4 but more importantly, I think the success that we have seen in Seattle is due to the coalition building that we have done. I have Cindy Black and Spencer Olson out in the audience, who are dear colleagues to me. We can't do this work alone. No organization can do it alone. And by us bringing across multiple sectors, you'll only be able to strengthen the movement to implement a similar program in your jurisdiction.
Thank you, Cynthia. Liz, you've been a long-time grassroots community organizer. I'm curious, what led you to choose democracy dollars as a big issue for Oakland to take on? And what were the problems you were hoping it would address?
I think I want to give a little bit of background first. So Oakland Rising for the last 15 years has been building political power in what we call the flatlands. And so this is working class, poor communities of color that have been disinvested in and redlined for generations. And so, about 20 years ago, organizations that were doing base building work around different racial, economic, and environmental justice issues were trying to go to City Hall to really push policy, and were getting turned away because we had a very neoliberal mayors and very neoliberal city council members. that really just continued to see the same kind of policies where they prioritize developers, prioritize corporations to pollute our air and our water and our land, and then, led to lots of displacement in our communities. And so we have gone from a city that was 65% Black to 25% Black, and in the last 15 years. And so we came together in order to begin to engage and mobilize voters in the flatlands as a power building strategy. So our end goal actually isn't to just pass a ballot measure or to get somebody in office. It's to actually build power amongst community, to be able to speak to thousands of voters or thousands of people at one time, to engage them in a process so that they're not only coming out to vote, but they're actually pushing against power. So I want to be really clear about that. And so we've been focusing more on the democracy piece in our work because it is an overarching element in order for us to be able to pass policy, we need to have equitable democracy, which is not only accessible, but that engages the community. And I think that's a big difference. And the reason why Oakland Rising decided to join, we're a collaborative of 8 organizations, so it's not like I just decided on my own. It was like a big coalition of folks that came together and decided this was the piece that we would work on and push together, because we knew that that would also engage and bring people more into our power building strategy. And Oakland Rising built over the last 15 years. We went from the very beginnings of 1,500 voter supporters to garnering 60,000. Like when we talk to voters at the doors, at those low propensity, first-time voters, when we talk to them at the doors, we're talking about 70 to 80% of the electorate is going to vote our way. And so we put out extensive voter guides, we do endorsement processes, and so we push against power in the city and into Alameda County. So that's sort of the basis of why we started and why we joined Democracy Dollars work. I think the other thing about it was the coalition of folks that we stepped into the room with was important because, I've said it before, and I think, I'm gonna talk a little bit more about it in a bit, but it was really a broad-based coalition, and we were brought in as the arm of that campaign to do the outreach. And we pushed in that space to really focus. You all ran a campaign, and I'm just going to name the room as very white, right? And you all are probably most likely to be outreached to. But in most campaigns, campaign consultants don't want to talk to our communities. They don't. They don't want to pay for the translation. They don't want to do the additional work that it creates trust of the actual conversations in the room. And we know how to do that. And so when it came to, if you want to win anything in Oakland, you got to bring it to Oakland Rising, because we're that arm of that work. And so like we're talking to, like 60% renters in Oakland. We have 60% renters. We have working class folks, communities of color that are really deep in the city. And so that's who we're engaging. And that's why we were brought into the process.
Thank you for sharing that and bringing attention to the issues within, how these topics get talked about and even funded. So thank you for that. I want to point out that the Measure W received 73% of the vote, which is incredible for something like this to get that support. Can you talk a little bit about what you think were some of the key factors to that passage? I
think first it's is the coalition that we created. So it was Oakland Rising. We have an umbrella organization in the Bay called Bay Rising that we set up a steering committee for. And Common Cause California, Northern California, ACLU, Asian Law Caucus, and NAPLIGHT, and the League of Women Voters Oakland came together. These folks probably wouldn't end up in the same room in many other situations, And so when we came together, we really spent an incredible amount of time establishing trust and principles of how we would work as a coalition. And so every dollar that was spent, we talked about it. How we moved strategically, who we would hire. It wasn't any one person. Of course, you know, the legal folks really brought their expertise to the room. We brought our expertise to the room. So whenever, you know, they led in the conversation, but it was always a joint decision. And I don't think we ever even got to a place where we had to be like, you know, vote, you know, it was like consensus every day. And a lot of laughter, a lot of fun together. And I think that those things really matter. It's the relationships that at the end of the day, the same as when you engage people at the doors, you have to be building relationships with people. And that's I think, the principle and value. I think the other thing that really helped us was because we actually had some really strong electeds in office, progressive electeds that we helped on our C4 side. So Oakland Rising has a C3. On our C4 side, we helped to elect some really strong progressives in Oakland that helped to champion it in order to get through city council to get on the ballot. And those champions really worked with us on that legislation and advised us in particular ways that could really help. And I also think that one of the biggest things, and we were talking about it earlier, Aaron, about like, we know the political landscape. We know what is moving at any given moment. So I think that at every step of the way is something to talk about and to work on, right? So when you start, we started it like the process 6 years prior to winning. And that conversation was very, you know, the conditions were very different. We were like post-Trump, you know, like Trump and everybody like, oh shit, our democracy is at risk. And right, the virility of his messaging and his, the way that he moved politically really set us up in a way that people were like, we need to strengthen democracy. So when we went to the doors, we were told actually by Seattle folks, give sweeteners, which were other like democratic or pandemics type reforms. And actually the conditions in Oakland required that we didn't actually meet those or needed to talk to people about those things. Our lead actually was democracy dollars, your opportunity to like join in this process. And people really resonated with that, like the Black and brown voters that we talked to. So I think like understanding the conditions of where you're working, because we were so rooted in the community and the political landscape, that we could actually win.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And in that spirit of collaborating and participating, there's a number of democracy vouchers and democracy advocates here in the room. If you could raise your hand, please, if you work on democracy vouchers. I just want to point them out. Please, for folks who are interested, talk to these individuals. We have Common Cause, we have folks in Seattle, San Diego, Washington. We really want this to be a learning community, drawing upon lessons and trying new things. So, and Liz, before we go, what advice would you give to folks who are looking to get started, and how can they support your work?
I mean, you know, learning also from Seattle and from Washington is coalition building. You can't just drop in out of the blue and say, we're going to bring democracy dollars to this place. It really has to be part of the relationship building. I think really understanding and knowing the political context, because even though we won, we had to fight for at least some implementation money because of what we were advised to put into the ballot measure. And then we were faced with $345 million deficit in the city of Oakland, and the funding was cut severely. So our ability to implement it and the landscape now has changed. And our progressive candidates are now completely under attack because of this crime and punishment kind of narrative that is out there, the fear that is being stoked, and the ways that the right wing and the venture capitalists and developers in our town are like, you know, fueling hatred between different organizations, different people, different communities, using Asian people as wedges against Black folks. Like this is not a new game, but it's heightened in this moment, and it is actually a tool of the right. And so like for us, it's like now we're faced with trying to, the conditions that we won with or we brought it to the ballot are different. And so what are we working with now? So always at every step of the game, looking at what is your landscape? What is the context? What are the conditions? Who are you talking to? Where are the people? We saw, because of displacement, we saw huge movements of our voter supporter base leaving Oakland. And most of them, I will say, ended up on the street, right? Became unhoused. We have 8,000 unhoused people in Oakland, of a city of 400,000. So we're talking like about years and years of this kind of displacement, years and years of the type of rhetoric around more policing, more conditions that criminalize communities of color, pitting us against each other in order to maintain the status quo. So I think that understanding your conditions, understanding how that is always constantly moving, and having people on the ground who know that conditions and know how to lead on it.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Sorry, one last thing that I would say is make sure that your campaign includes non-English speaking media. You must have the array of languages that can reach as many of your electorate as possible, particularly amongst you know, Spanish speaking and different Asian speaking languages, because without them coming across to the other side, sitting on the fence without anybody talking to them, right? And having someone talk to them in their language, culturally appropriate work, then you can bring folks over to your side.
Thank you for that. Pastor Leslie, thank you for being here. You just started exploring democracy vouchers in Cincinnati. Can you tell me what was it that brought you to the idea? What inspired you about it, and what have you been learning along the way?
Well, first, I want to thank you all for inviting me to be here today. And hopefully I don't get too preachy, but I am a pastor. And whenever you give me a microphone, there's something about that anointing that begins to exude. As Mark Twain said, if the world was going to go to Cincinnati because they'll know 20 years later. And I travel extensively. I work with, folks that are sitting here on this panel. I see all the progressive work that's happening, across the country. And then you have good old Cincinnati. So in 2017, I actually ran for Cincinnati City Council. We have a complete 9X system. So 9 at large, no wards, no districts. And we have the same retread. I mean, people run for office there 20 years, they get term limited, they come back 20 years later, and they run. And so they keep running. And oftentimes those are people that do not look like me. And while we have had probably 50 years of Democratic rule in Cincinnati, it has not proven well for people of color communities, and particularly low-income communities. But development and developers, of course, are booming. And so we began to look at what really needed to happen as we have a shift in demographics also. Much like Oakland, we have a city that was almost 50%. Well, it was 50%, and at one point, well over 50% of the population of Cincinnati was Black. We are now sitting somewhere around 40, between 38 and 40%. And we are starting to see our neighborhoods and our communities literally be decimated, disappear. There's no, you go there and you don't even think that maybe there was ever Black people there. And there's such a rich history of, the end of slavery and all of that in Cincinnati. So when we look at that, we say, what is that going to mean down the road for our city and our community? And we look at, there needs to be some reforms. So we began to look overall at all the reforms that need to happen, but particularly we needed to have something happening around campaign finance reform and electing folks. In 2017, as I said, I ran for city council. I thank God that I didn't win. And a part of the reason I thank God that I didn't win is that 3 individuals that did win all are now either have served or are getting ready to serve jail time for bribery. And all of it was around development deals. They all happened, 2 happened to be Democrats, 1 Republican, 2 African-American, and 1 white male Caucasian who came from the wrong kind of money. Let me put it that way. He didn't come from the old money in Cincinnati, right? His dad was pretty new and struck something great, invented something and struck some deal with Procter & Gamble, and that's how they got their money. But that wasn't the right kind of money in Cincinnati. And so when we look at that, we say, well, and I was told that I shouldn't even consider running if I couldn't raise $75,000. And I was set out to prove that I really didn't need to raise $75,000 to win a race. I came in 12th in a race of 28 contenders, 9 seats. There were only 9 seats. I finished 12th. There was only 1,800 votes between number 9 and myself, where I raised $10,000 intentional, right? So, thank you. So as we looked at that, we have to find what are the ways that we can change some things here. One, we have to get big money, or I like to also think of it as shady money, not so much dark, but shady money out of politics, and also get a pathway for people such as myself that are everyday grassroots people. One thing they didn't say, I'm also the founding pastor of my congregation that has survived 20 years in a very conservative place, and we are pretty radical and progressive, and where people said we couldn't do it. So I think people like myself and others, who we have a system of having neighborhood councils and community councils that are supposed to be, overseeing their community and the neighborhood, but they can't actually run for office and go down to City Hall and make some decisions because either they can't raise the money, or they don't have enough name recognition, or they don't come from the right side of the tracks. So when I look at that, I think about what happens every year. It probably doesn't happen in majority if you're a person of faith and you have a faith community. It probably doesn't happen in your neighborhood. But in Black neighborhoods, every election cycle, politicians file through our churches. They come in, they wave, they make all these promises, they do all this stuff. Some of them, just now that we have, social media, they show up, they take pictures, and if they took pictures with the right clergy at the right church, right place, they're going to get the vote. That's pandering. No, we need to stop that and bring an end to it. So as we explore that, the way much as the national scene has set up, has done a lot of the work for us. We don't have to explain a lot now. We just show up at the door and say, do you want to fight back? And people are like, yeah, we got to do something about this. And so we needed a way. How do we combat that? How do we change that narrative? How do we stop a lot of our Black clergy, honestly, from thinking that they have power and influence because the mayor calls them to a meeting and never shows up at the meeting they call, or the council members. How do we change that? How do we put some power back in these people? And we have people sitting in those congregations that want to run for office, want to make a change and impact, but they can't get involved. And so that's really how we began this exploratory conversation. And actually, right before the pandemic hit, we were actually talking about at least getting districts, and we had a campaign all laid out. We were ready to collect signatures, and then we had shut down. And at one time, we had proportional representation in Cincinnati, and it changed when a Black man was going to be most likely elected mayor. And so we look at all of those types of reforms, but we have decided, as we're building, as Liz said, we have to build a diverse coalition. And we're at that point of building that coalition and talking to them. And right now, what is at the top of our list is democracy dollars and looking at some type of change in how we elect our city council members.
And how are folks responding to democracy vouchers as a reform?
Well, most of the electeds are like, what? What are you talking about? Huh? What? You mean I don't have to take any more money for the developer? I don't understand. So on that side, we've had some pushback from some electeds because we're having conversations with both our county commissioners and city council members because we still don't know if this should be a county initiative or a city initiative. And where we should really be starting with that. But people on the ground, the grassroots folks, boots on the ground folks, are like, yeah, teach me more, I want to know more. But we've also learned some lessons along the journey, not to have what we kind of call those wide broadcast meetings where everybody that wants to do something shows up and you end up with 20 more. So we've learned not to do that. I've learned that real easy. I thought, let's just put it out there and see who responds. Well, I've gotten everything, and so I have learned to be a little more strategic about invitations and vetting. But I do understand, that people want to make change, and what I'm excited about is that it is right now a broad. There's a spectrum. There's a broad spectrum of people who have an interest, and they're wanting to learn more. And so that's where we are with that.
And I'd love for you to touch on too this, how you bring your faith-based approach to this and what folks who are in faith-based communities can learn from your organizing around anti-violence.
Right. So for me, it kind of starts, I think, for me at a very young age. I pretty much knew that I wanted to be in ministry of some sort, some way. I did not want to say I wanted to be a pastor for some obvious reasons. I was a little cantankerous and mischievous child as well. So, but I was taught that's why I was going to make a great preacher. And so in my upbringing, I grew up in sort of a Baptist Pentecostal experience in my home. My stepfather was Baptist, my biological father was Methodist, and my mother was Apostolic Pentecostal. These people who raised me decided that the best education was for me to go to a Catholic school. Right. And I had an uncle who was a great friend growing up, and he was Muslim. I grew up in this very pluralistic, kind of environment, and always thought something is wrong here with some of this. We have all this separatism, we have all this division. But then when it came to politics and in my house, I also grew up in a very politically active and civically active home. There didn't seem to be division there a lot. They all seemed to be a one party, kind of thought the same. For the most part, most of my family was very socially conservative as well, and physically conservative. At one point, many members of my family probably were Republicans, and of course, with the shift, then they became Democrats. But there didn't seem to be a lot of difference there. But when it came to certain issues, my family seemed to be like they'd be at each other's throats. And I thought, well, but they always thought, and I always knew these elected folks. Elected folks were always around. And I was like, well, how's my grandfather, talking to that guy that every single time he votes against our interests? I don't quite understand that. But yet, certain things would happen. And I'll just give this example, like a road got paved in our little country town in North Carolina, on one side, and it happened to be the side that my great-grandmother lived on. Only that part of the road got paid. The other part of the road didn't get paid. What is happening? You know, and I'm beginning to wonder what is happening. And so as I grew and I began to understand, it's exactly what I spoke about, how elected officials parade through the Black church, and that there are conversations that happen sort of off to the side, and individual congregations, individual situations, you know, seem to get help, but not the whole community. And so when I looked at that, I was like, something's got to be done about this. I also, in my ministry, became one of those pastors that would get called on by organizers during their campaign time because I was progressive, I could speak, I could rile the crowd up and get out there. And then when I started talking a little about stuff that needed to happen, they disappeared. We have to start, stop kind of thing. I don't know if that means shut up. No. Oh, it just seems like my mic was going in and out. I began to see that there was nothing being built that would sustain the work that we really needed to do. And so I kind of labeled myself as a rent-a-collar. And so when I would get those calls, I'd be like, oh, you want to rent my collar? Okay. You know, and that's honestly how I felt. And then a lot of clergy, honestly, because of many times being socially conservative around certain issues, just around a few issues really, would get honestly proselytized by evangelicals on the right and often told a whole story that made no sense. And so, and I've been to those meetings as well. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And I began to tell folks that I actually agreed with, no, I'm not gonna come and speak at your rally. I'm not gonna do this because it does not oftentimes weigh good for me. And so along came the opportunity for me to have a conversation with the folks at the Ohio Organizing Collaborative and gave them my long speech. And they said, well, will you join us as a consultant and kind of look at what we're doing and give us some feedback? And I did that. And then I said, okay, thanks, you know, wish you guys well. And they came back about 3 months later and said, well, who's gonna do this? I go, I don't know. I just gave you the report you asked for. And then they said, oh, it sounds like you wrote your job description. And so I accepted the task, and that's why I came. And I really came, and I'll close with this point. Matthew 23:23, if you read that story, it's a story of the scribes, the Pharisees that are challenging Jesus. They're challenging Jesus about this group of people that are not keeping the law, right? And they're saying, okay, they're not keeping the law. We are good law keepers. We pay our 10%, right? But these were the same people who also were putting weights on the scales at the market and overcharging the people. Sound familiar? And Jesus's response to them was, you know, he called them a brood of vipers. And back then that was calling somebody like snakes, you know, we would, you know, have some other words. I have an official cusser in my congregation because I can't cuss over the pulpit, so I point to them and they say it for me. And so, you know, yes, you can. So, you know, because there are some choice words you want to say. And so in that, Jesus said to these Pharisees who were keeping one part of the law, and you can kind of follow that and where I'm going now, the things that are so unlawful. And then Jesus said, but you should be concerned about the more weightier matters of faith, of justice, love, and mercy. That's why I do what I do. Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Okay. And are folks able to stick around if they have questions?
Yeah,
after?
absolutely.
Okay, great. So just before we move on quickly, how can folks support your work?
Okay, you can look for us at amosproject.org, and sure, we take contributions. Most of all, if you would do one thing for me, those of you who are praying people, or you send good vibes and energy because we need it in Ohio.
Yes. Thank you, Cassie. Next up, out of Vasquez, you were a candidate in 2020, running against one of the most powerful politicians, not just in Los Angeles, but in California. Tell us, what was that experience like? What was fundraising like particularly? And how do you think a democracy vouchers program would have changed that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, welcome everyone to Los Angeles. I hope you're all having a great time. Thank you for being here. I'm Aura Vasquez. I ran in 2020 for city council here. LA has 15 council members for a 4 million, people city. So it's a pretty small electorate for the amount of people that live here. And my district is one of the most diverse districts. We have places like Koreatown, Little Ethiopia. We have historic, West Adams, which is an African-American neighborhood. And 70% of the community in my district are Latinos. So it's a very diverse, pool of people. In 2020, I ran against a very prominent politician, Mark Riley Thomas, who, after he got elected, was indicted by the FBI on 22 counts of many, different things. In the past 5 years in Los Angeles, at least once a year, we have seen an elected official being indicted and actually going to jail. So some of them claim they're innocent, some of them fight with the rest of the city council members when they get, suspended from their duties. They want to keep serving as they are accused of crimes. So we have a very interesting kind of moment here, and especially after the pandemic, when so many people saw small businesses closing, renters being on the verge of being on the streets, people with no work. I mean, we really, as a society, experienced such a struggle, in our healthcare system and our democracy also. So in 2020, when I ran, one of the things that I can identify with a lot of the other speakers is that I also went and knocked on doors of the unusual people. I'm the first Afro-Latina from Colombia, an Afro-Latina in general, to run for city council in LA. So for me, reaching out to my people was important. It was out of principle. I didn't care what the consultant said. The consultants also said, you gotta go get the high propensity voters, the people that vote all the time. Latinos don't vote. So when I went knocking on these doors, one of the surprises that I found is that a lot of people said, I have been living here 24 years, 30 years, 15 years, 5 years. Nobody has ever come knocking on my door. You're the first one. Right? And that's a problem. We are at the American Democracy Summit. And that's the bottom, that's the most democratic thing that we can do. So our job, all of us here, is really push for an agenda where every voter has a voice, and that every vote counts. We have to start reaching out to the people that come and vote and are in the mix and are in the pictures and are, going around. Our people deserve our attention, and they deserve to also be part of the, of the electoral poll, and also deserve to know that there's elections and that these elections also affect them. So of course, people told me also, in order to run for city council, you need to raise $500,000 for a grassroots campaign. So in LA, we have already some sort of form of campaign reform. We have a city matching fund program where people in Los Angeles can donate for every dollar. Not enough. That was not enough to go against a powerful politician that had all labor supporting him, that play all the dirty tricks on the book. And now, I'm not just talking about House of Cards, guys. This is life. Where they poison wells, where they call people in my community and said, if you support her, you are done. You will never work here. You will never, we will never do anything for you. Where they call me to offer me jobs, fancy jobs too, to kind of get me out of the race. And that's how I kind of got involved with democracy vouchers, because I thought, well, that's not enough, because all those doors that I knocked needed also a reason to come out and to say, well, if the money in politics is so important, how are you listening to me if I don't have any money? So this is why this is so important. We're hoping now in 2024 and moving forward to establish a democracy vouchers, program that can help people like me and that can really, and now I'm running again. It's the same districts and stuff. And democracy vouchers could be a game changer for all those doors and those people that I go and reach out to that feel like they don't have a stake in the game.
Thank you.
The next one isn't until 1:30, so we can definitely go over.
Perfect. Thank you
If
so much.
y'all are down.
Okay, so yeah, just to inform, we have a little bit more time than we initially thought, so we'll continue with the questions here. Audrey, you're also environmental activist. What's the connection you see between campaign finance reform, democracy vouchers specifically, and the issues you fight for?
Yeah, I always say that the same people that are polluting our environment, the fossil fuel industry, are also polluting our political process. Because they invest, and I give you my example again. They gave out, money to certain local trades in 2020, the petroleum industry, so that they spent $40,000 against me. I was the only candidate that had an independent expenditure against her. We also need to tackle independent expenditure, because somehow we need to figure that one out. So democracy vouchers today are such an incredible way. Imagine now, I'm running again. Imagine if I could have the choice to all of those doors that I'm already knocking, people that I already know, people that often are like, you're the first one to come knocking on my door, that they can say, well, I have $100, I'll give you 50. Imagine what will also that do to the regular establishment candidates that know the playbook, because they have a system that works for them. Doesn't work for people in our community that actually can be representing the real interests of community members, on the ground. So especially with environmental justice is so important, because again, the same people that we build gas plants in, that have low air quality, that don't have healthy water or clean water, are the same people that never get to participate in our political process, and that we need to change that.
One piece of advice you give to either candidates who are thinking about, potential candidates who are thinking about running for office, or other advocates who are looking about pushing this idea, and how can they support organizations you've been involved with across the spectrum of issues?
Yeah, it's such an honor, and it's so exciting to see that programs like this are bubbling up at the local level, and that candidates like me can kind of get behind something like that and learn and give our experience and be great advocates. So if you are thinking about doing something similar in your city, go reach out to those members in your community that are thinking about running, and have them also offer their experience and champion these policies. Because there is nothing better than someone with their own experience is speaking about something that affects them, directly. In Los Angeles, we've been doing a very hard push. I wrote an op-ed that was published in the LA Times. We have done a lot of events. And I imagine a world where we have really a level play field, because this is what we're asking for. Now, we have a whole industry that revolves around elections. We have people that make a lot of money, a lot of consultants that make a lot of money. You all gotta fire these consultants. I'm sorry, get rid of them, because they don't really understand what we're trying to do. We are movement candidates. We're trying to change the face of the game, and we're trying to change the game in general. So it's actually not in their best interest also to help people like us, and also because their style, their playbook doesn't work for a candidate that was a former undocumented student. Doesn't work for a candidate that is a renter. Doesn't work for a candidate that cares deeply and acts with courage for our planet. They have their candidate that loves the developers, that loves their bankers and the people with money, that have a pool of donors that are going to contribute to that kind of work. And again, if we want to see a true democracy, guys, we're in 2023. The game is different. Social media is here. AI is here. I mean, if we really want to change the face of the game, we gotta also recreate what the game is. So that's my invitation to you.
Thank you, Lara. Now I'd love to move to the policy and legal realm of democracy voucher space. So Aaron, tell us about the policy and legal landscape, and what should advocates be aware of as they start their projects looking to push this idea?
Sure, thanks for having me. I know my contribution is going to be a little different because I'm not an organizer, but I do get to benefit and learn from the people who are on the ground. I serve as a legal advisor, and the role that I play and the role that I'd like to play is making sure that these solutions are actually they do avoid the legal pitfalls, right? And that legal advisors, policy advisors can inform the organizing. We are not. I am not an organizer. I am always in awe of the organizers and the work they do. But we can help, inform that process and strategy because, I have to think in the long term of, once this gets passed, then what does it look like? Once it gets challenged in court, what does this look like? And helping think in that long-term process, and then making sure that these wins, these organizing wins, these coalitional wins, are actually durable for the long term, right? That's the role that I see myself in, and making sure that we do lift up the voices of all these communities. That's what Democracy Dollars is about. That's what public financing is about. Ensuring that more people have access to the political process. And I want to make sure that when we get these wins, we get to keep them and actually benefit from them. The Seattle Democracy Voucher example is a perfect jumping off point for this, particularly because you saw it was passed in 2015, it went into effect in 2017, but it also had a legal challenge after it was implemented, and folks said that it was unconstitutional. They challenged the constitutionality of the program, saying that you're forcing taxpayers to subsidize other people's political speech, and that's compelled speech, and that's unconstitutional. But that's not what this program does, right? Public financing is about enlarging the discussion, making sure it's more accessible to people. And so when you look at the Seattle program, you can see that it's built into the legislation that there are legal protections in there talking about the purposes of these programs. It's not to stop someone else from speaking and lift up just one group of voices. It's to make sure it's accessible to everyone. And that's part of the legal and policy piece, is making sure that those pieces are in there so that when you get into court, we can successfully defend it. And that's what happened in Washington. The Supreme Court of Washington upheld the program as constitutional. Campaign Legal Center, my organization, was a part of that. But we also we're alongside all the organizations that were on the ground in Seattle, in Washington, to bring that win, home. Both, they brought it home on the ground and getting it passed, and then, we were there to help bring it home when it got challenged. And we want to take that win and keep getting more wins like that, make sure they're durable, especially as more groups see this can work. We want to do it in our backyard. How do we make sure that we're legally tight, we're ready to go when those challenges come up, the implementation challenges?
Thank you. And talking, you shared a bit earlier about not trying to finalize all the policy details up front. That comes later with the coalition. But when people are getting started, what's most important for them to know as they begin this work?
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's really helpful. It's really helpful for me to know what's going on out there, right? I have groups that do come to me to the Campaign Legal Center because we've worked on these issues before, and they say, "Oh, what are we going to do? How do we do this?" And sometimes it's early in the process, right? And we're able to talk through. Here are kind of like the guardrails. Here are the things you can't do. Here are the things you can do to try to. And that, to me, that's helpful because that helps inform the discussions that people are having about what can we pursue? What's going to make this legally risky? How do we make sure that, you know, everybody in the coalition is on the same page about what we're actually pursuing? You know, is it a transparency reform? Is it a democracy dollars reform? And then once you're actually talking about the details, having set that groundwork of having an early conversation means that people are on the same page about what, you know, the lines you can't cross, or maybe the lines that you're going to push a little bit. And that's the role I see myself then, is like, how do I do that? How do I make sure that I'm giving good advice to folks as they're developing their policy plans? The cautionary tale, right, is a different public financing program that is a long-term, like a long-running program in Arizona, where, you know, it's a successful program, and we're certainly supportive of it. It's not democracy dollars, but we're supportive of it. And they had included in their program a piece that was like a legal mechanism for increasing the amount that a publicly financed candidate could get in public funding based on the amounts that their privately funded opponents were getting. And so you basically ratcheted up how much public financing you would get. And that, you know, that sounds like you know, personally, that sounds like a good idea. But legally, that was something that the US Supreme Court took a look at, and they struck it down because they said, you know, that's, you know, regardless of their view of how, you know, they reasoned through this, you know, they said that has the effect of burdening those private candidates' speech, right? Because you have public funding, and yeah, this is what the opinion says. So that's what we're going with. I'm just the messenger here. But knowing that that's out there means that, you know, folks in the coalition who are deciding what their policy is can make decisions knowing that, like, that's a risk that could come up if you want to adopt something similar to that type of system. I will be the first one to tell you that that is a risky thing to include because it could get struck down. And, you know, the US Supreme Court essentially said, if your goal, and then this is in their opinion, if your goal is leveling the playing field, you know, that's not a constitutionally permissible goal. The goal is expanding, you know, expanding who has access to our political process, enlarging the public discussion. And that's really where we focus on, you know, the purposes and the design of these programs.
Thank you, Aaron. And then if people want to get in touch with you to you know, ask questions, to use your resources, how should they do that?
I mean, so the best way to do it is to contact us at Campaign Legal Center, because it's me, and I also have other colleagues who are fantastic working on this. And the best thing to do is certainly feel free to grab my card, I have cards. But I also, you could email info@campaignlegal.org.
Mic drop, literal
Yeah,
mic drop.
very exciting.
We did it.
But I am around, and so if anyone wants to chat afterwards, I'm happy to chat.
We're gonna say bye to the live stream.
All right, and thank you, Aaron. And we're being told we're saying bye to the live stream. Thank you for joining us virtually. Okay, y'all, you are free to leave.